Hello and welcome to Thinking Out Loud. I'm your co-host, Nathan Rittenhouse.
And I'm your co host, Cameron McAllister. In this episode, we talk about globalization and some of the challenges and vulnerabilities that exposes us to, and we consider that specifically through the lens of the overproduction of soybeans in North America right now, tariffs affecting that, a massive bailout is probably coming as well. So, lest you think that this goes in a purely political direction, let me assure you it does not. This is Thinking Out Loud. We talk about some of the theological ramifications, and also we talk about what practically we can do to live in a world that increasingly seems to work against our own cultures, our own customs, and even individuality and diversity. This will be helpful to you as you think through some of these issues. As always, you can like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to support the work that we do, you can do that by going to www.toltogether.com and clicking on the donate button.
We want to talk a little bit about the difficulties, challenges, questions, and responsibilities of living in a hyper-globalized world at a time in which some of the assumed normalcy of globalization is being pulled back. Different flavors of nationalism or protectionism are at play in the political world around us. And then thinking about that as a Christian and how all this pertains, I want to get your thoughts on some of this, Cameron. Let's jump in with a kind of a little metric that we've used in the past. I know your dad's talked about it before. I forget where he got it. But if you think of concentric circles, where the outside circle is your area of interest, then the one inside is the area of concern, and then the one in the middle is the area of focus. We've used this before when we've talked about empathy or care or concern or reading the news, and I've found those to be largely helpful categories. There's the things that you're interested in, but you can't really be concerned about like every single thing in the world. What the dolphin population is off the coast of Japan might be interesting. I don't know what it is. I'm not deeply concerned about it right now. Then there are like things that you're probably concerned about, whether or not there's a shifting tectonic plate under your town, something like that. And then there are things that you're focused on that like this really is a large percentage of my day, or even a calling that I am called to focus on a hyper specific spot. So interest, concern, focus. And that works to a certain extent. I want to ask you, Cameron, about like what happens when that starts to break down. And the way that I'm thinking of this is actually through American farm policy right now and some of the massive fiscal crunch that we're seeing. So let me
Farm,
lay this.
not foreign.
Yeah, farm and it's farm and foreign, and this is
Yeah.
the interesting part of this. So just to catch everybody up to speed who hasn't been following the news or doesn't know anybody who grows soybeans, the situation is this: is that the U.S. produces crazy amounts of grain. I mean, the agricultural productivity of the United States is phenomenal. It's nuts. Like, for example, we grow 3 times more corn than the number of acres in England. Like, just think about that. Our corn patch is 3 times the size of another country. So our capacity to produce is wild. In fact, this year, corn growers in the US are going to plant 2% less acres than during the Civil War, but harvest 790% more corn. Like, think about that. We're using 2% less.
Yeah.
We're using 2% less land and producing almost 800% more corn in the same space. So on one hand, now I know there's a whole lot of ecological, environmental stuff and markets below that, but just to say our capacity to grow corn, very high. Here's the thing. We grow way more than we could ever possibly use as a country. So a lot of that obviously needs foreign exports. And one of the massive buyers historically for corn and soybeans has been China. And just to be clear, the corn and the soybeans that are grown at this scale are not this isn't sweet corn. This is what we turn into ethanol and livestock feed. But if you go get an ear of corn out of a field, and it's terrible. Like, it is not palatable by humans. There's a reason that we turn it into syrup and cornstarch and all kinds of other things, because you wouldn't want to eat it. Pigs and cows enjoy it, but we're not talking about human food here. We're talking about food that feeds the food that humans eat. So anyway, so China buys a bunch of it, and we kind of have a system in place where the farmer goes to the bank, borrows a couple $100,000, in seeds, fuel, and plants the crop. And then if the crop doesn't make it, then we have this whole crazy subsidized crop federal insurance thing. If the crop does make it, then they get to sell that and recoup their losses, and hopefully pay back some of their debt. So you're talking about farms that are largely leveraged against the value of their own land to produce a crop and then hoping to get paid for that and cover their expenses at the end of the year. So, due to the whole tariff thing, China's like, nope, we've stockpiled tons of soybeans, and Brazil, Argentina, some of the South American countries have really been ramping up their grain production. China's switched over to that, and so you're looking at a situation in which you have farmers uh, all across the country, particularly in the Midwest and the big grain growing regions, who suddenly have a literal thousands and thousands of tons of a product that nobody is buying. And then you're not going to get paid for it. And then obviously you're going to default on your loans and maybe even your own property. So big collapse coming. And then just like happened when this happened in the first Trump administration, there'll probably be a huge bailout. So we'll spend billions of dollars to keep farmers going, growing crops that nobody wants or needs. And it's all complicated. I'm using all of this as a story to say that we're living in a time in which it's harder to work through the paradigm of interest, concern, and focus, because now you have farmers forming groups and hopping on buses and flying, or planes and flying to Cambodia to ride around on buses looking for, export markets for their soybeans. And anything that you buy off of Amazon that has a made in China sticker on it, like it's
Mm-hmm.
it's really, really is hard to think locally, because a tsunami and like the war in Ukraine changes the futures of corn in the US, and like it's how do we live in this? I think is the question, where it used to be globalization is great, globalization is great, big markets, and then there's a little bit of like, oh no, eat fresh, eat local. Look at the little library at the end of your street, small is cool. Um yeah, there's some it's a weird time to be living and to try to make sense of what is my responsibility, what should we be interested and how do we focus and make sense of all of this.
Well, one of the recognitions now, I mean, it's more than ever, is that globalization, for all of its advantages, comes with amazing vulnerabilities because now one weak link in one nation or one conflict, one war affects everybody because we're all players now in
And
this
COVID really
globalized system.
highlighted this, right? Supply chain shutdown in
Absolutely.
Taiwan, brings the production of specialized bicycles to a grinding halt or whatever. Um,
Absolutely. It was this amazing chain reactions, many of them, in international settings, that was affecting housing developments in your area or bicycle production. You name it. Or you wanted you where are all the avocados? Well, so
yeah.
yeah, that's another story as well. The habit that we have of thinking that we should be able to eat anything anytime in or out of season, all of that. So there's that sense of vulnerability. There's also the other side of this, Nathan, is there's a growing tension in many nations. And you see this with the European Union, for instance, where a lot of these countries really want to hold on to their national identities and their customs, but there's tremendous pressure to not do that, to drop all of that. So there's a bigger issue here where modernity, and this is painting in very broad strokes, but just kind of homogenizes everything and
Mhm.
grinds it all down to a kind of the same bland, big, massive market. But then when you do have these sorts of you've got tariffs now in the mix and all of that, you're going to you begin the system begins to buckle, and there's this huge vulnerability. I also think, Nathan, of the UK. The UK, I mean, England used to be distinguished by what it makes. It produced
Mm.
lots of goods.
Yeah, but
It
not really in my
produces
lifetime.
not in your no, in our lifetimes. I mean, my dad. So the last great kind of gasps were happening probably in what I would say the 1960s or something like that, right around when my dad was growing up. That's when Great Britain was ceasing to be so great. But now it produces nothing. It's totally dependent, and it's been consistently weakened. Its culture is dying. And so there's a growing also recognition there that we need to be able to take care of ourselves. That we need to have some sort of independence in our different regions.
Well,
But we've
let
got
me
this
give
whole
an
global
example
setup that
that
militates
that
against that.
yeah,
Yeah.
so because you can look at, all the conversations about multiculturalism as a failed project in the UK. Well, let's take
Yeah.
another example. Is it is it concerning if you end up with the population of Italy being predominantly French and eating pasta that's made from wheat grown in North Dakota? Is that the success of globalism or is that the loss of something? That's the question we're asking in our time.
And I think one phrase that was really helpful was coined by Marshall McLuhan. That man coined a lot of phrases, but remember, he was the first guy. He was the one who gave us the global village,
Mhm.
and that's what we were moving toward in as globalization really took effect. Yes, so it's a big question, and you can it it's divided right now, I think, unhelpfully. I'd love to get your thoughts on this, Nathan. So the question you just posed, does that represent a loss? So if you have a majority French population in Italy consuming pasta that's been produced in North Dakota, is that does that represent a loss? I think that most people, when they're answering this, give an answer along political lines. I think that's a mistake. I think it goes deeper than that, but I'd love to hear you weigh in. This always gets cashed out in political terms right now.
Well,
Well,
but
if you're a stick in the mud kind of conservative, you want to hold on to customs and you don't want to change. You think change is bad. But if you're a progressive, then you think, we need to modernize and move on. But I don't know that that's necessarily the most
well,
helpful way to
let
talk
me
about it. I'd love to
let me
hear you.
not
Yeah.
let me not answer your question, but complicate it. In that
Oh
the
boy.
reason that I think the political lines are not helpful is look at how they've shifted. So if you think of let's go back 10 years, that eating healthy food, maybe you're slightly anti-vax, you're a little skeptical of the pharmaceutical industry, you want to eat local food. Which political party is that? That's the left. Now you have the whole Maha thing. The other, it's like the RFK Jr. was the dream of the suburban Democrat mom 20 years ago, but he's on the other side of the. I mean, so it's like all of these things on from
Yeah.
all kinds of fiscal stuff, or even if you look at nationalizing tech companies in order to maintain sovereignty over certain technologies as a form of national security. Whose move is it to nationalize private companies? Was that the Republican Party you knew? No, so all of these things are the political lines are zigzags and crags. They don't even work on some of these deeper issues. So there's me not answering your question, but saying that that's why our fundamental analysis is difficult.
One way to get at the loss piece, I think, is think about the regional accent. I like the way Wendell Berry laments the loss of regional accents. And if you've ever heard him talk, the man sounds like he comes from Kentucky. But he talks about how that increasing sense of homogenization that I mentioned. I mean, listen to me. I'm I'm an example of this. My accent, I talk like somebody from nowhere. I am a broadcaster's dream. I was once told by a guy who worked in radio, yeah, you have the perfect voice for this. You enunciate very clearly and you have no distinction whatsoever in your accent. Ah, gee, thanks. You sound like you're
I'm
from
from no,
Kansas, in other words.
I'm from nowhere. Yeah.
Yes, because the joke used to be that they wanted news anchors to be from Kansas because I guess Kansas has one of the most
Neutral.
non-distinct neutral
Okay.
accents out there.
So let me take a stab at answering your question. Is that I think as a Christian, we should be radically pro diversity. I think the loss of diversity is a travesty. Um, so we can you can let's use a corn example. Starting out, there used to be regional corn varieties. That's not true anymore, because people don't use open pollinated corn, so you don't have like a regional flavor. But or an easy one is cheese, like or the cheeses are named after the towns, or your cattle, your
Right.
Guernseys and your Jerseys are named after actual islands, and so you had this Hereford from Herefordshire, and Angus from the Aberdeen, like the Angus. The so you can look at all of the or apple trees or varieties of fruits and vegetables. All of them had. Why do people talk about Italian pasta or German alcohol or sausage or um, South Korean kimchi, or what does it mean to go out and get Thai food? Or we have this expectation that these things are all good. There's something assumed in it that we celebrate, um, and we want there to be this diversity. At the same time, all of our cultural and economic structures and educational systems are opposed to the existence of those things. That seems to me to be the crunch point that we're trying to put our finger on here that we can't quite process.
So why is that a loss? Why is it the
Ah,
world of those differences and those distinctions? I think we should say out loud why that it's a loss.
I mean, so maybe we could start off by, I think most people would just say there's an aesthetic thing to this. I like the fact that there are different colors of flowers in the world. I like that the stars are different brightnesses because they're different distances. There's something about difference that shows complexity, that is a part of glory and splendor. that that you like. Why do people want to visit different national parks? Because the national parks are all different. um yeah, there's something about the discovery and the exploration, and the fact that the complexity of humanity is too great to be contained in any one culture. There is a loss when we get down to only the type of apple that tastes terrible but can be shipped internationally the easiest. That seems like not the right goal.
There's what you've mentioned a bunch of things here. There's definitely a loss of quality with some of this stuff. You get an inferior product. I mean, that's a gross word, I guess, but you get an inferior apple because of, demand and all of that. There's also a sense, I think another one I could add to this would be the dilution of a distinct culture that can happen when you have a rich heritage and set of customs that are now either being forgotten or lost or left behind, or just mixed and matched. I'm going to give a crude example of this, but I think it speaks symbolic volumes. There was a TikTok trend for a while of getting a Costco pizza and dipping it into chicken tikka masala. So dipping so get an Indian curry, a good Indian curry, and then get this Costco pizza and dip it into the curry, and apparently it tastes fantastic. Now, on the
I'm
one
up for
hand,
trying that.
yeah, you could just that actually doesn't sound bad. You could say, "Oh, well, it sounds pretty good," but think about that in deeper terms. The constant mixing and matching. It sounds almost like a form of culinary syncretism, where you have two completely different forms of food with a whole constellation of practices behind them that are so very different and customs, and then you just blend and mix and match them. The same thing happens when you see these fusion restaurants that just bring all different kinds of foods together and just throw them all in a blender. There's so on the one hand, it might be an interesting hack and you might get some cool new flavors, but on the other hand, dilution is also happening and you are clearly losing something.
Ah,
Curry pizza was not meant to be I mean, curry is not meant to be mixed with pizza.
you heard it here first, folks. Well, okay. How
That's
about this,
right.
Cameron? Maybe here's what we're wrestling with: is that the grinding everything down to the lowest common denominator operates under a philosophy that unity is only possible with uniformity. And the gospel does not do that. So even when Paul is saying there is no slave nor free, Greek nor Jew, male nor female, he doesn't think those categories stopped existing. He's saying there's something broader that unifies them all the way through the vision, Revelation 7, of men and women from every single tribe and nation and tongue and language in worship. That
Hmm.
seems to me to be the goal of the unity and diversity side of this, um, that I would hate if it wasn't there. So
There's a
so to
really
say
pow
to say that there's
Yeah.
cultural difference does not mean to say that there can't be unity in a cosmic understanding of who God is, the way we relate to each other in reality. Um, but it's part of the discovery, and also part of the, like, it's interesting to think about humans being made in the image of God, and if we were all one skin shade, that would make us think something maybe specific about God, but we're not. So
Mm.
there's an expression of the complexity of the character of God that I think is manifest in the diversity of the people culture relationships and even geography and the flora and fauna of the world around us.
And I think a powerful example here would be think about Pentecost. I turn to that actually quite a bit when I think about the flattening effects of modernization or just the post-industrial world, but how when you have this the Holy Spirit comes upon the disciples, and then there's a great multitude who hear them, and do they are they all speaking exactly the same? No, they're each being everybody is hearing the person in their own language. You have a beautiful picture of unity and diversity coming together there, and unity does not equal uniformity. The unity is brought together by Christ, the head, the way, the truth,
So
and the life,
yeah, and in
but they're
Babel,
hearing in different languages. Yeah,
so
I
so
love
in
that.
at Pentecost, you're watching reverse Babel,
Right.
because in Babel, people could not be trusted to all say and do and think the same thing, or they would turn themselves into gods. At Pentecost, the power of God was made manifest in such a way that people could be entrusted with unity, even in their diversity.
Mhm.
Once again,
Yes, because these people were seeking the kingdom rather than their own self-deification. I think it's a beautiful, I mean, it's an event. It's an historical event, and it's a powerful story also for our time. It speaks right to the heart of so many of these issues. But in the meantime, Nathan, I'm curious, is there because there you mentioned some of these, small is great and local movements that seem to be gaining traction for a while. Is that still a growing, is that movement still gaining traction, or is it slowed down a little bit? It does
oh,
there I mean, there seems to be
it's a
more of
secondary
yeah.
movement. It's secondary to pricing. So if you're
Hmm,
going to say, I'm going to wear a pair of shoes that was made by my local cobbler and they cost me $312, or I'm going to pick up a pair on sale for $57 on pick your website or, you know, retail chain store, which one are you going to do? So you have to be pretty philosophically committed to the idea in order for. I think this ebbs and flows in times of the perspectives on the economy. Basically, when
yeah.
people have a little more breathing room in their wallet, then the mom and pop store, it's a cool thing to support and be part of. Um, when eggs are 97 cents, you're not going to buy them at the farmer's market unless you're really ideologically committed. So I think it all comes down to this entire conversation is fundamentally one that's driven by economics, not by philosophy for the most part, or theology.
Yeah. Yep. No, that makes sense. In our day-to-day lives, Nathan, what are some practices that you find helpful in, I don't want to say counteracting, but in narrowing down on that focus for where you actually live and pouring into the place where you exercise the most immediate influence?
Okay, so here's, and I'm not good at this, but this is the framework that I have in my mind. If I were to, so I live in West Virginia. If I were to get up and I read that there's a huge rainstorm in California, the news tends to try to take everything global and make it seem like it's an immediate local crisis. It's if it's not raining if I look out the window and it's not, I'm not taking an umbrella. I can look at my own local news and my own local weather forecast, and I don't change my life based off of what's happening in another state or another nation or another country. I can't live as if everything in every other part of the world is an indicative of what it is that I should be doing with my life. That's an impossibility, and it's ludicrous to think so. So one thing is to push back against um, the everything all together, every place, all at once kind of mindset of I
Hmm.
have to know and understand everything immediately. That being said, there are senses and developments of things that it's like when a tsunami happens, how do we know that the tsunami is triggered? What triggers the tsunami? The alarm? There are sensors that are miles and miles out into the ocean that when a huge wave surge comes by, it triggers the sensor and it sets off an alarm on the mainland saying, "Hey, this massive wave is coming. You might want to move." And so I try to, in the way that I look at the world, not think that everything that happens someplace else is a tsunami. On the other hand, be very cognizant of the trends of the things that are likely to affect the time and the place in the world and my family and the way things are. So, I mean, a big one. We were talking about this. Like, I was just sitting down with my kids the other evening of like, look at all of these videos. None of this is real. This is all AI. This is all fake. Is it funny? Yes, but none of this is true. You're going to grow up in a time in which what you see cannot be believed. Let's have that conversation. So that's not a sky is falling narrative. It's just like this is the way that the tidal wave is moving, or the tsunami wave is moving, and let's do something to prepare for that. And I think you see that biblically. That's the consider the ant, you sluggard. Harvest is harvest. All through the summer to prepare us for the hard time. So there's a sense in which we can be just mindful of the things and the patterns that are changing in the world around us, while at the same time not losing our ever loving minds and spazzing out every single time that something comes across our
Hmm.
screens in 40 font with dread music behind it as a harbinger of how I'm feeling, or if yeah. So it's I'm not good at it, but I do know that a differentiation has to be made there, and that it
Hmm.
seems like the biblical response has something to do with our therefore, since Christ is seated, set your mind on things above, and to I think there's almost a point where I have to be overwhelmed with it to the point that I recognize that I can't process it, and I won't be able to live well until I say, Lord, would you help me see this day what you would like me to do and focus on. And so that's a lot. That's a sentence that I ask myself each day. What is the actual priority of this day? Um,
That's a really
and
important sentence. Yeah.
yeah, and here's where it gets tricky for me. Both of us have been reading. I'm sure we'll talk a lot about in the future. Paul Kingsnorth's latest book, "Against the Machine: The Unmaking of Humanity." But there's a sentence in there that's really been stuck in my mind, and I forget who said it, but he's quoting it. He says, "Growth for the sake of growth is the philosophy of the cancer cell."
Mm.
And for healthy growth, for you to live well, there's this sense of like total growth and the maximization of everything, until I remake the whole world in my own image is not a good goal. Like, but healthy cells say, okay, we're going to replicate until we're a functioning kidney, and then we're going to do the task of being a kidney. But we grow to a certain size, and then we do that task. And obviously, deep imagery there, biblically speaking, of us being different parts of the body. But you know what? Your kidney does not know that it's a kidney. Like, it's doing a very important task for your body, but it's not conscientious of itself as a kidney. And so like, what does it mean for me to grow into the thing that God has created and designed for me to do, and to know when
Mm.
to stop and be like, okay, I am the size now
Mhm.
that God wants me to work in this way. That's the first question that I'm praying through in my life right now, of like, what shape am I supposed to take in this world? And then the second question that's a little more unsettling for me, Cameron, is, do I need to understand it in order to do it? Do I need to understand the big picture of my role in order, like, does your kidney need to know it's a kidney in order to be a good kidney? It doesn't.
Mhm.
Does Nathan need to understand the total picture of what God is creating in the areas of my life in which I touch reality? I actually just need the next step. I don't really need the big picture. And there's a little bit of that give us this day our daily bread um,
Mm-hmm.
kind of aspect and element to it. And so I don't want to get so distracted in trying to analyze the meta narrative sequences of the continuous growth and development of my life that I miss out on growing into the healthy size and shape of what it is that God is actually wanting me to do. And so it sounds quaint to answer the question in this way, but I can't legitimately, Cameron, come up with a different way of answering that question than to say that I have a deep sense that spiritual formation is the key to
Yeah.
this problem. And that I'm not just saying that like in a Jesus loves me, that's the Sunday school answer, but I legitimately am sort of at the end of my rope of saying I don't see another way to be able to understand the push that I need to grow in the right directions, or the boundaries and the limitations and differentiations and definitions that I need in order to function well without some external help. Um, Certainly from the Lord, but also from the community and the people around me. So I think it's a, if there was a good political answer to this, or a good mathematical or a good economic answer to it, or if like we could just throw more money at it and figure this out, I think we would have.
Mm-hmm.
And we're living in
Yeah,
a
I think
time in
that's
which
fair
we're
to say.
throwing more money
Yeah.
and more political action. And like this seems to be like
Yeah.
we're throwing wood on the fire trying to put it out. And
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm just wanting to sidestep this and say, wait a second, are we fundamentally asking the wrong questions here? And can I learn to be okay in a different paradigm and to live a life that actually is more productive and has a better local and perhaps global impact by not trying to have a global impact as my main priority?
I think those are fitting words of wisdom and very helpful. Helpful to me.
Well,
So,
let's be clear, I'm no good at it. This is just what I'm working on,
oh yeah, no, you've
or what
said
the Lord's
you've
working
said that,
on
but I think
me on. Yeah.
we are no look, all of us, if we're Christian people, we are pilgrims and we're learning as well. This is one of the very practical reasons for why we need each other and why we do need that community and why we do need to go to church and worship the Lord in spirit and truth and read his word. But also, I want you to notice that Nathan basically answered my question by pointing to a very vibrant life of prayer, but also prayer asking very simple and basic and very important questions. And I think the not what do I not need to understand, sometimes we need to follow without fully wrapping our heads around something. And that's a challenge, but it's true. I mean, we serve, after all, an infinite God. And there are so many different aspects of our lives that remain deeply mysterious, from the friends we know to our spouses, to our children. Human beings are all are mysteries to us in the sense that we can't fully comprehend them comprehensively. Only Christ can do that. And yet we still maintain relationships. We still have to move forward. So I guess I'm just saying we walk by faith, not by sight, to use a good, apt, and helpful phrase. You've been listening to Thinking Out Loud, a podcast where we think out loud about current events and Christian hope.
Thanks for listening to Thinking Out Loud. If you'd like to learn more about what we do, book Nathan or Cameron, or if you'd like to support us financially, whether through a one-time donation or on a monthly basis, you can do so on the donate page at www.toltogether.com. That's toltogether.com. And please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and sharing this content with your friends. It really does help.